Libby Osgood. I am currently a teacher or a university professor at the University of Prince Edward Island. Sorry, I forget we're on Zoom. I'll talk slower. I teach engineering there, and today I thought I would open up a discussion about some of my journey, and then also bring some kind of cool things about science and religion for you. This isn't heavy on that because it's 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, but I'd be happy to discuss that further with anyone that likes to. So let me try this sharing screen here. Okay. Here we go. So, and please do pop any questions down there. It's kind of hard to go back and forth, but my plan is to talk for about 30-40 minutes and then to answer any questions you have, because I know I had a lot just to do with religious life and all of that. So please ask really anything that comes to mind. So good morning. Are you feeling tired today? Just to start with that. If so, there's a good reason why. Last night you traveled 860,000 kilometers while you were sleeping around the sun. One of the reasons I love to understand science and study science is you get this huge perspective. I mean, I just thought I was in my bed, but it turns out I did a lot of work last night while I was sleeping. Or rather, gravity did a ton of work for me. And really, if you take that one step further out, last night you traveled 5,700,000 kilometers, almost 6 million kilometers around the center of the Milky Way. And there we are in our cute little sun. The arrow's off a little bit, but there we are in our cute little sun around the Milky Way. And anyone who wants to check my math, I'd be happy to tell you how I got that. So I loved science. I loved the universe. My dad was an aerospace engineer. So from this dorky young little tiny kid, I always loved space. We went to my dad's in the US Air Force, and we lived all over. And so we got to see museums, and we were in DC when I was younger. Excuse me. And so the Air and Space Museum was a regular stop for us. Then we moved to Texas, and good old Huntsville, NASA Goddard, or NASA Marshall is right there. And so in 5th grade, he and I actually went to space camp together. It was a parent-child program. And we built rockets, and we did all kinds of stuff just for fun on the weekends. But what you see there is a Mercury capsule. You can kind of see it at the front. I don't know if you can see my mouse. That's a person sitting in there. That's how astronauts got to the moon, or got out into orbit for the longest time. And so that's me as a scrawny little 5th grader in that capsule. So you can see just how small it was for someone who was in there for probably something like 12 hours or longer. Then I got the chance in college. I ended up studying aerospace engineering in Arizona, and then to Texas A&M. I went on for my master's because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And while I was there, we did this project where we made a little balloon set. So do you see that little thing in my hand? It's just a little tiny camera. And this was back in 2005, 2004. So digital cameras were big in size. They were huge. And very new concept. So it was all about programming them. And it was attached to a great big weather balloon that went up into the sky. And this is the picture that it took. So it went up just to the border of space. So while I was still a student, I got to see the border of space with something that my hands touched. And there's just something so incredible about that I just can't say enough. You know, the feeling is so inspirational. And this is a little tiny guardian angel. And I think this was the beginning of my science and religion sort of wanderings. Because let me say, we grew up Catholic. Everywhere we went, I was in Catholic school most of my life. And, you know, we always went to church, we invited the parish priest over. We were a very involved family. And I guess since my dad was an aerospace engineer, we had a conversation once about it, but, you know, so what's this whole, how do you do evolution in 7 days? How do you do that? I remember only one discussion about that really, but it just felt natural. But this little pendant that I added up there, that is a little tiny guardian angel pendant that I pinned inside of the balloon set. So because we got that little black box back, I now have a little necklace that I wear that's been to space and that I can wear. I also, just so you know, made one for my mom and my sister, and a little thing for my dad for his wall to say thank you. Then I went on, and let me clarify, I never worked directly for NASA. What we were doing, I worked for a company called General Dynamics, and they built satellites for NASA. So if you can see on the screen in the top right corner there, that's a satellite with the solar panels all squished in. And we built the part that's basically an orange and the solar panels. We put all of that together. And then the science, the instrument, is on top of that. That's the metal foil on top. So we were the integrators. We basically were the people that made sure that the camera or whatever the sensor was has enough power, that it can communicate back to the ground, that it has everything that it needs. So we were the integrators. So I worked on NASA satellites, but I do want to clarify, I was never worked directly for NASA. I show this picture because, you know, part of my talk is about visioning and modeling. And so much of what we realize is possible is only if it's modeled around us. So if you look at that picture, there's not too many women. And I hesitate to say the ones that you can see were the admins, except for the lady in the front row. But I leave this up as a little bit of a Where's Waldo? And that's where I am. Maybe the long hair gave it away. But there's a lot of very homogeneous faces there, you know? And so I find that women in STEM, women in engineering, many of them have a father or an uncle or someone very close to them, a parent, I should say, because as women are engineers, to model that for them. And so that's, you can see it very clearly there. Then came launch day. Now this satellite that we were working on, what it does is it goes out in space and it looks at, it looks for gamma rays, which are very high energy pieces of information that can tell us more about black holes and these fantastic things you might have heard about, you know, dark matter, dark energy, the Big Bang, all of it. Our next clue, we realize, lies in gamma rays. So they wanted to study more about it. So on the left is, you can see the little tiny satellite. It looks a little bit like SpongeBob there, if any of you know that cartoon. And this is the inside of the rocket. So on the right, you can see that's the rocket in Cape Canaveral, Florida. And I actually got to walk all the way up to the top of that rocket. There's an elevator, but it sounds better to say walk. But it's like 14 stories high. You can see each of the different landings there. And the rocket is just in that top white part. So all the rest of that is just the fuel that's required to get into space. Just the only part that's the payload, is the word we use, is in that top white part. And that's the part you can see on the left with it opened up as a shell. Something that's kind of cool, inside that shell, as soon as the rocket gets to space, the shell falls away because it doesn't have to be aerodynamic anymore. But written on the inside of that shell, tons of people write signatures and they sign it and they say, "For my daughter," or all these beautiful, inspiring messages, because those are going to fly away and those messages are just out floating in space. And so I ask you, you know, who are they writing those messages for, if not as prayers, you know, to the great unknown, to the great wild of space. This was me in Maryland on that same day, June 11th, 2008. I was on a headset and I was a systems engineer. So my job was really to communicate with people and kind of do the overall what's going on, and not from a management standpoint, but from a, if something goes wrong with one group, there has to be a connector to say, okay, who else does that impact? And to try to, I was a troubleshooter in a lot of ways. But there I was 25, and I was on a launch. I mean, it was just incredible. I got to give one of the go, no-go signals. So different than you've seen. Okay, I'm gonna, just in case you can't see my face, because I love this part. I am, let's see, stop share. Okay, so space. So the launch day. So we're sitting in this room in Maryland. We've got a headset on and we've got a live feed to Florida, which again, it's 2008, that's 12 years ago. That was pretty new technology. And it's just sitting there getting ready. And what most people don't realize is that launch is really like 8 hours, that people are sitting there 8 hours or more ahead of time, getting ready, waiting for the big moment. And every so often they have these checks where they run through the whole list of maybe 50 people saying, okay, you know, systems, go, no go. You say go. EPS, go, no go, go. And they're very specific people supposed to answer. Well, the person that I was working under, he was really kind and he said, you should do one of these. You need to be able to do one of these. So I did. So a couple hours in, I got to give one of the go, no go signals. And what that means is, if you say no go, there's something wrong. We have to delay launch. So the hundreds of people that are involved all have to figure out a new launch window. It's going to be another day. I mean, that's what we saw on, if you were paying attention to the launch just last week, they had to scrub for some reason. I think it was weather related, but I didn't look into it. But so if you say no go, I mean, it's millions of dollars. They look into it and everything. Anyway, I come on the line and they say systems and I say, go, in my little 25-year-old voice. And there was a pause, and they were expecting a man's voice. And so they had to, what I found out later was people were down there in the control room in Florida saying, who's that on the line right now? Who could that be? Blah, 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 because they were expecting a man. So I just think that's kind of entertaining, that it wasn't that I was a woman, it's just they had been hearing a male voice and it was a different pattern. So I'm very grateful to James. He let me take that, which was great. Okay, I'll share screen again. So let's see. Oh, and that's what it looks like out in space. So with its solar panels deployed, we can't deploy the solar panels on Earth because it's too heavy. So the panels would just break off that because they're hugely heavy. But in space with no gravity, you can deploy them. So that's what it looks like while it's out floating around in space. And I could talk so much more about about the space stuff. So I'll pause my love of all things space there, and switch my story a bit. I love this. Obviously, you can see how excited I get with this. I'll slow down, sorry. I get so excited when we talk about space because the majesty and the wonder, and we've only seen such a small part of the galaxy. We've seen our solar system, and we have a few satellites that probe, that go and send pictures back, but we don't even know what we don't know. But what was happening at the back of all of this was I was very filled with fun and excitement and travel, and we were working 80-hour weeks sometimes, and I did the middle of the night shift because the other guys had families. And you know, it was a very exciting time. but there was something lacking, and I knew that I could feel that hunger and that lacking. And when I talk to other young adults who are just out of college, I can hear that, 1 or 2 years into their job, that you're in that searching mode. And I went to church. I had a lovely parish, St. Timothy's in Mesa, Arizona. And I went to church wherever I happened to be, Florida, Maryland. I was all over traveling. But there was just a longing. And so anyway, I ended up, my uncle is the person who was involved with Mick and Dury Children of Hope on PEI. I don't know if you've heard of it. And he said, do you want to come with? And it happened, the satellite had launched. I was working on another one, but it wouldn't launch for a long time. So we were in normal 40-hour-a-week mode. And so I said, yeah, sure, why not? And it changed my world. And I'm intentionally not showing you pictures of, myself holding a beautiful baby or a group of school kids or anything like that. What I wanted to show you was the school. The school, we visited many schools. We went to a couple different places in Kenya, and my whole world just changed. So I think what changed so much was that these people were happy. People that were going to school like this were thrilled to be in a school because their parents had the school fees, which were minimal by our standards, to be able to attend. They could pay for the uniforms. They had food to eat. And there was just this gratitude that I just didn't understand, because all around me were these people who had gorgeous cars and amazing houses and lovely families. And there was malaise. There was this deadening feeling that in some ways it felt a little bit like Groundhog Day. You know, that movie that about halfway through, you're like, okay, I get it. Let's speed this up. It felt a little bit like that, and back in Arizona. And so here I was in Kenya, where every day this particular town, the people who live there and outside of there, it was a fight for their existence every day. And so you see such a strong reliance on God and such a strong reliance on anything outside of yourself. Whereas I realized we in the first world, or in a developed nation, we don't have that fight in us because we have most of us have a safe place to lay our heads and all of that. So anyway, so it just struck me. And there's a quote from Richard Rohr that I find very helpful. Sorry. There's a quote from Richard Rohr. Let's do share screen again. There we go. That I find very helpful. He said, a genuinely new experience does something with you. It leaves you out of control for a while and forces you to reassess your terrain, finding new emotions, and to realign your life coordinates. And if you've ever experienced that, you do feel out of control. It's like all of a sudden something happens and your entire world is shook and the ground is no longer the ground, you know? And it's like, I have to do something. I have to, what is happening? You know? So it takes time to figure all that out. And I think those are those incredible God moments where we get touched by the spirit of truth and what is. And the picture that I include here is, I think that's a neutrino star. But what you see coming out, those are gamma rays. That's what my satellite looks for. And it's of course an artist rendering, but do you see how powerful that is? It's just about to explode, you know, with just energy. And that's so clearly what it feels like when you're in that moment. So I changed my life. I moved to Prince Edward Island because that's where the group was from that I ended up going with, and my mom's from here. So we would come up and visit every single summer. Um, and I just wanted to live with family. I took a year off, and then I started working at the University of Prince Edward Island. I had my master's so I could teach engineering. And whatever I did, I made sure I got back to Kenya every year, because that was a touchstone for me of truth, of authenticity, of, the hunger for God, the hunger for what is. Um, and the picture that you can see now is a young boy looking at a robot. So because I was a teacher, when I'd go over, we did all kinds of things, medical clinics and vision clinics, and helped people with disabilities. But I was mostly involved there with, I got to bring a robot a couple times, because I started working on my PhD, and I was taking a course, and I couldn't just miss a month of the class. So my professor at Dal, I was getting my PhD at Dal while teaching at UPEI, so going back and forth every Friday. She said, take the robot. So once I had the robot in Kenya, I said, oh, I have a robot in Kenya. We're going to do something with this. So I brought it into the schools, and there was just a fascination. This group of girls is my favorite picture in life, because I think that's what fascination is. That's excitement. That's learning right there, that curiosity. And if we could be that curious with everything around us, and with ourselves and our spirituality and God, if we could be that involved, that'd be fantastic. And one year I went 7 years in a row, and the last year I was there, I led the group that went. And these are a few of my university students that came and did engineering projects. The girl on the left, Kayla, she works for Vector Aerospace now. Her team had done a project the previous year, and she wanted to go to Kenya to help them implement it. So she did a lot of work with community leaders there and getting the devices built. It's a charcoal press. You can see the metal there. To find ways to help with deforestation and to save the workload for many of the women who carry these big, heavy wood bundles. And on the right, these two young men were doing their project there, and they were helping to redesign this wheelchair to help this father move his adult daughter around in the most rugged terrain with, flat tires and everything. So you can see kind of here they built handles. And I think that's what attracted me to engineering in a big way, is helping people. Engineers solve problems to help people. I know there's a lot of things that people do as well, building weapons and all kinds of stuff, but I think at the heart of it, engineering is a desire to help people, to make the world a better place. And Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he can be very divisive, I know, in many circles, but I love this quote of his. He was an archaeologist, well, a paleontologist, he was out in the desert searching, actually searching. And he was involved in a couple of digs that did discover an early form of man at the time when evolution was hotly contested. So here's this Jesuit priest who was actually on the ground working. And he wrote this Mass for the world because he didn't have access to resources to have a Mass and all the materials every day. And he calls upon all the aspects of the world as his offering. And he can be misunderstood, I think. But anyway, that's such an aside. But he said, we must add one stitch, no matter how small, to the tapestry of life. What can we do? How can we contribute in our own small way to make this beautiful tapestry that we all live in together? And so that's, for my part in my journey, that really stuck with me. And I could understand that. And yet here I was now in PEI, going to Kenya once a year, and February was fantastic. And the few months afterwards were incredible too. I was still riding that high of doing something and being that one small thing, but still seeking, still searching. And I just didn't know, I wasn't satisfied. That's all I knew. But I didn't feel a call to religious life. I didn't see sisters and say, oh yeah, I want to do that. It was through relationship that it developed. We have a good young adult youth group here that just kind of does their own thing and comes together. And it was a great network of support of people seeking, and long story short, the chaplain at the university and I and a few others became friends, and we ended up taking her to see the Cabot Trail because she had never before. So my story lands me in Meat Cove. My big gong moment of I need to be a sister happened in Meat Cove, off the Cabot Trail, admittedly, but part of Cape Breton. And we were having a discussion about ministry, and I had never seen sisters who were engineers. So even though I felt Catholic and I would study at night and go to mass and, all kinds of things, it felt like two separate parts. I couldn't see the wholeness. And my friends there said, they told me, your life is a ministry. And I said, fools, what are you saying? My life is not a ministry. And if I can set the setting, we're sitting outside in these really basic cabins. I mean, you brought a sleeping bag and there was like a mat and no lighting, but we were overlooking the most gorgeous view you've ever seen of cliffs and water and sky that just stretched for miles and stars. And, it was just an incredible setting to have this big conversation. And they said, your life is a ministry. And I said, psh, please, I teach engineering. What about that has anything to do with the church? And they looked at me like I was foolish and said, really? You don't know? What you do is called ministry. And I think because I had only ever been exposed to sisters in a teaching role, I had one teacher who I recently just connected with, a first grade teacher who was a sister, and pastoral associates really in the church, but all very within the confines of the Catholic Church. Where they worked started with Saint something or another, which was fine, but it just wasn't my calling. I love engineering. And I had grown to love teaching quite a bit too. And the sister kind of cocked her head, Sister Sue Kidd, and she looked at me and said, do you know what we do? And I said, no. She said, we're liberating education. We're teachers. And I said, oh, so I could teach engineering and be a sister? And she's like, yes. And I'm always sure she was thinking, how dumb is this girl? I thought she was smart. But she says she wasn't. She says she wasn't. But so all of a sudden my world slammed together, just like that beautiful star you saw. That it was my second big aha moment that was like, wow, all of this is possible. Wow. And that May, Brother Guy Consolmagno came to visit. He was there for a conference that Sue organized, and she was busy with the conference, so she said, can you show him around? And I'm like, wait, the Vatican astronomer is coming? But that means he does science, and he's a Jesuit? Oh, Jesuits do science? Oh, wow. And that was just, moments before this big moment in Meat Cove. And so here I got to drive around this guy, and we were chatting about like comics and making all kinds of, math jokes as you do. And he was so human and so completely okay with science and religion and being a religious brother and doing science. And here it turns out that's his job at the church, is to actually study science. I mean, my mind was blown. He's got a few really interesting books. One is called Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? Because he gets that question a lot from the media. Another is God's Mechanic, where he talks about um, the different ways people show their faith as engineers and scientists, because I find we tend to be more hidden. I think the faith is there. You just don't talk about it. But you kind of know. When I was working, I knew, oh, that man's a Mormon, and that person goes to a Protestant church, and you kind of knew who was who. Oh, that guy's Jewish. And I wish I could say more. Oh, that lady. There wasn't a lot. But Brother Guy, well, I read into him so much after meeting him, and this is one of his quotes: "If you accept that God was the creator of this physical universe, then it immediately follows that studying creation is a way of worshiping the creator." So what a beautiful understanding of the cohesion between science and religion. It's what I do can be a form of worship if I do it right, if I do it with the right intention. And I never understood that before. So again, having the models to show us what's possible, is so powerful. And on the heels of that, I dropped him off at the airport and practically caught a plane myself. And I got to go teach for a week in India. And then on the way back, I went to Medjugorje. And it just happened to be a trip my mom and I were planning. And I felt a call towards simplicity there. And so I went home and got rid of a ton of stuff, really just simplified my life. And I see that as the beginning calls towards poverty. And then that fall was my big Meet Cope moment about a month or two later. And Sister Sue introduced me to this woman named Marguerite Bourgeois. And I'm not too sure how many of you are familiar with her. I wasn't. As an American, I hadn't heard of her. But she was the first teacher in Montreal, in Ville Marie. And she came over to Canada in 1653. We're just celebrating the 400th year of her birth right now. And I felt such a kinship to her. She was passionate about everything. I mean, when you read her writings, there's no like, oh, la, 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 la. It's like, bam, bam, bam. And so I could feel that. She was fearless and brave. She went across the ocean 3 different times. One time to just go get a signature from the king, and another time to put the book in front of the bishop and say, these are our rules, make us an order. And he sent her away and said, go, 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 all the way across from Canada to France and back. So she was fearless and passionate. She liked travel. I like travel, teaching. And she had a gong moment, her gong moment, as I call it. Our Lady appeared to her in a vision. I mean, a little different than mine, but, I got to be in Meet Cope. That was pretty cool. But I felt such a kinship to her. She talked about how we shouldn't wear habits, how we should be daughters of the parish, how we shouldn't stand out, how we shouldn't hide ourselves away. And really, she started the first uncloistered group of sisters in North America. And you don't hear about that a lot, but she did. So anyway, the more I looked into her, I said, whoa, yeah, I could do that. And the charism of the Congregation of Notre-Dame is liberating education. So engineering counts. There are counselors. There are people who work with homeless youth in New York at Covenant House, helping children who are on the streets. There is anything that frees the human spirit is something where we feel called to. And I just thought that was so beautiful. Also, you'll notice in a lot of Marguerite's writings and stuff that there are images of her that there are First Nations people. She took in a child who was a First Nations person. We had First Nations sisters. I think maybe like the 5th or 6th sister to join was a woman who was First Nation. So I also really appreciated her inclusivity, that she said, you shouldn't have to have a dowry to become a sister. It should be a calling. And so I bought it. I bought everything she was selling. She said, when the heart is open to the Son of Grace, we see flowers blossom in their fragrance. And much of her writings has to do with the earth. She talks about the remora fish. She talks about pumpkins and cabbages and gardens and flowers. And as a scientist, I get that. That's evidence. I can understand those commonalities. I just want to point out the picture in the corner. One of someone, I think in Japan, we have sisters in Japan, Cameroon, Honduras, Guatemala, and France, the US, and Canada, and I'm missing one more in Central America. But anyway, one of the people in Japan did that image of her recently because she's so contemporary in her writings, even though it's 350 years old. She'd be wearing a mask today, I'm sure of it, out helping people. And so I joined. I became a candidate. I spent a whole year saying, let me in, let me in, let me in. And I think my eagerness was a bit off-putting because there's a system and a process. And I was just ready. I practically had my suitcase and said, I've been waiting my whole life and I didn't even know I was waiting. Let me in. And they were a bit more wise and said, you should think about this a bit. This is a big decision. So I entered in Summerside, and I was a candidate for a year. Something kind of cool, that same day I got my PhD, or the day after I received my PhD. So it was almost like, okay, now go. Now one section of life is not ended, but you now have the tools you need to continue on. Then I was at the novitiate in New York for 2 years, and while I was there, I had missions in Toronto, working a lot with the homeless people who are homeless, and doing awareness work with children in schools about homelessness and poverty and hunger on a worldwide scale. And then I went down to the Appalachian region of North Carolina, this very poor region, and got to do a lot of work with kids and working from a parish, and people who they're no longer migrants because they live there, but they're undocumented. And so I got to live the fear that they live with when I would drive them around. And it was a very, very incredible experience. These are the sisters that I lived with at the novitiate. This was our Christmas card one year. You've got your shepherds and your wise men, or the kings, and I was the star or the angel at the back, however you want to say it. But some really good sports. We had a lot of fun, and they really helped me to learn and grow. And it was hard times. I'm not going to pretend. There was a lot of personal growth, a lot of formation, a lot of why am I being called, and a lot of tears. But there was also the space to do incredible things, like I read dozens of books on quantum physics, something I always wanted to do, but never had the time. I took courses on the Old Testament and the New Testament. I barely took a liberal arts course at all. And here I was, taking a theology course from Elizabeth Johnson, her last semester, teaching about the ecology of the earth and how where we are called, looking at each of the different ologies within Catholic teaching. It was incredible. And then just this last July, so we're not yet at a year, that's the Chaplaincy Center at UPEI, I made my first vows, had my first profession. And I want to read you the second paragraph of our vows. It's just really, really quite beautiful. It says, by this covenant, inspired by the mystery of Our Lady's visitation, I wish to make my life one of praise and thanksgiving to God, who is ever faithful, and to bring to others the knowledge of the incarnate Word. So, taking in mind Brother Guy's idea of the best way that we can worship, bringing praise and thanksgiving to God, I now get to do that as a teacher at UPEI. I teach students engineering. I'm back in my old job, but in a very different way. And I can honestly say, before I used to teach engineering, and I made sure I got all the targets and the learning objectives, but now I teach students, and that's been the big change. And the topic happens to be engineering, but it's the students that are there in front of me, or now I guess on Zoom, who are the ones that are part of it. So while I'm at a public institution, I don't talk about God, I don't talk about faith. The only way it comes into the classroom is they might see my cross, or if I'm telling a story about the sisters I live with, or the women I live with, that kind of a thing. So that is a little bit odd, but it's still possible. And I just didn't know that it could be, and I didn't think that it could be. So I've just got that's the end of my story. That was a long story, I know, but I've got a few little quotes here that I thought might be helpful to do with science and religion. So Pope Francis said, and he was a technologist, he worked in a lab before entering as a priest. So he wrote that beautiful document, Laudato Si, and has a great understanding. He says, all that is true, or all that is good, all that is true, all that is beautiful brings us to God. Because God is good, God is beautiful, God is truth. And so often when I'm praying, I'm just playing music, or I'm doing something like that, or walking or enjoying nature. And it might not be a prayer with words, but it's prayer. We have to reconsider all the beauty and all the goodness that God gives us, that we can then reflect back and reflect out into the world as our prayer. Einstein said, science can only be created by those who are thoroughly imbued with aspiration towards truth and understanding. Look at all those great big words. Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. We've heard him say that a lot. And it was hotly contested as to whether he was an atheist or someone with faith. There's a letter here that he wrote to a little girl named Phyllis. She wrote him a letter. And on the picture on the right there is a mussel plant that I was at. Those are mussels, little tiny baby mussels. And there was a starfish inside. I was taking my students there. And that picture I find so salt of the earth. So the seeds, literally the seeds, they call them mussel seeds, of what could be, and yet of hope and majesty. Einstein said, "Dear Phyllis, everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that some spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, one that is vastly superior to that of, let's say, humans. Vastly superior, that by studying science, you recognize this greatness. In this way, the pursuit of science leads to a religious feeling of a special sort, which is surely quite different from the religiosity of someone more naive." And he's cutting about people who don't study science, as scientists can often be. But the message behind it is that scientists have a different ability to worship and to study because they're connected to what they're doing and recognize the source where it comes from. The picture that you see there is at Joggins in good old Nova Scotia. That's one of my favorite stops. When I'm going from the island to Halifax, I try to stop there when I can. There are fossils all over that beach. Hundreds of millions of years old fossils. What you're looking at there is something like a palm tree. In the foreground there, it's a palm tree that has the texture of a pineapple. Hundreds of millions of years old, just laying on the beach. I think 50 years from now, we'll never get the chance to do that. But if you're bored, go to Joggins and comb the beach. You have to know what you're looking for. You can't take it, but you can let the scientists know and let them see it. Okay, so in conclusion, what I realized was I started my life loving the universe. I moved towards seeing the world when I went to Kenya and starting to actually see. And then I discovered the people within. Through religious life, I realized this world is not things, this world is people. which sounds obvious, but it wasn't to me. And so I want to, oh, that's too bad. I want to end on this quote by Mother Teresa. And I'm sure you've seen it before. Let's go down to the end here. She said, oh, that's not a good picture. I am going to pull it up. Oh, there it is. Good. Okay. She said, we cannot do great things on this earth. We can only do small things with great love. And I'm sure you've seen this before, this quote, because it so encapsulates the beautiful things and the powerlessness that I think we can feel of, but what do I need to do with my life? But what this, but what that? I mean, especially now in our current climate of, Corona and the civil rights that we just are, it's so necessary now to come through, but it can feel heavy. It can feel overwhelming. And Mother Teresa told us we can only do small things with great love. And that's very similar to one of the scientists' quotes from earlier. So my questions to you are, how open are you to newness? And if you feel a resistance, where and why? I constantly feel a resistance in myself in different places, but now I'm attuned to asking the question, why am I resisting this? And I learned so much more. And the last thing is there somewhere that you feel called that maybe you weren't expecting? So that's my presentation. So I'll take a look at the chat now and see what we have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I covered a lot. Okay, there's a question there. It says, have your slides about your life led to student asking about God? I don't have those conversations with students. I've only had 1 year of experience at this point. And I think they can sense that I'm not super comfortable in finding my footing and talking about that in a public institution. I'm very aware of that. But what I find is that hearts meet hearts, right? When you're talking, you might not be evangelizing using words, right? But I think goodness knows goodness. And that's something that can be very attractive. So I wouldn't say I have a lot of conversations about God. I am involved in the chaplaincy center. So the kids that I know, the students that I know that do like to talk about that, I'm very open and do presentations with them. But I think people can be really turned off in the wrong setting. And when you're in a classroom, when you're trying to learn about a particular topic, I'm very aware of that. That's all, yeah. Another question, I wonder how your teaching has been informed or changed by joining a religious order. Yeah, great question. I had a 2-year sabbatical, basically. I had been teaching at UPEI for 6 years, and then I had this 2-year sabbatical about where I got to go explore and learn about physics and learn about learn about myself, learn about God, learn about so much science and religion and scientists who are religious and vice versa. That when I came back, I didn't know how I'd be. So I really started from square one. And that's when I realized that now I teach students. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but the second week, normally in class, I'm like, because engineering is a professional program, I'm very particular about coming on time. You get a mark if you're not on time, even though it's university. Assignments have to be turned in time. I'm very particular about those things. And this one student came in late, and because he was a first-year student, I wanted to make sure that he knew, come on time. So I took him aside and quietly went into my standard lecture quietly, about professionalism and our role as engineers. And he said, I'm sorry, my parents kicked me out, so I'm sleeping on friends' couches, and I just missed the alarm. And I thought, oh, now that's a God moment, right? That's a moment where you say, this is real life, and this kid made it to class. Whoa, I need to realign what I'm doing. And so while I think before I would have just embarrassedly walk away or said, oh, I'm sorry, you know, this time I could hold that and acknowledge it, and have a moment with the student to have a real thing. Engineers, we often like to run away from feeling things are easier than people. And so and I will say it's much more tiring now that I spend so much more effort seeing the person within and the people in the chairs. It's exhausting. At the end of the day, I come back wiped. But the sisters taught me a lot, and them being a teaching order, hearing all of their stories about, you know, being in a first grade class, and then the next year having a fifth grade class, and then switching, and, you know, being moved all over the place. And it's very different now. So I have it good. I learned that. Okay, another question. How would you elaborate on the Big Bang Theory and the Genesis creation story? Oh, sure. This is one that I think we all grapple with. And if you look at pretty much every culture, every society, they have a creation story. Ours is in the Bible. Ours is in Genesis. And it's this beautiful allegory. It's this beautiful, there's so much truth in stories. There's so much truth. But we as Americans and Canadians and, you know, Western world, we like literal things. We like facts. And I think there's so much more beauty to the Old Testament than we understand. In my Old Testament course, I learned that when you read it with the eye of a Hebrew scholar, then you see so much more to the story. So I don't mean to say that the 7 days isn't true. What I mean is, what happened on the first day? There was light, right? There was light. What is the Big Bang but not an explosion of light? And then all of those atoms and everything colliding into each other, and we went from this explosion of gas banging into each other over billions of years, 14.7 billion years to get us here, where they kept banging and banging and banging and making stars, and then these chemical collisions, and then the stars banged into each other, and every collision, every relationship there, if you want to think of it that way, got into a more complex thing until we had solid ground and the earth. And things just complexified from there till we have this awareness that we as animal beings actually know we exist and we can choose. And God gave us the ability to choose things. Whoa, you know, and here we started from let there be light, and day was separated from night. And so, you know, the 7 days, I don't think were actual days, because what is a day? A day is the measure of the earth turning around on itself. I don't know that God measures things in days. I kind of doubt it. What is a year? The amount of time that it took to go around the sun for the earth. So for us to even say the universe is 14.7 billion years old, that's from our perspective as a tiny little planet around a tiny little sun in a tiny little galaxy in this huge universe. So what is a year even? You know, what is a day? It's something that helps us to understand as a measure of time. So I know that was a really long explanation and I can just keep going. So I'll move to the next one. It's hard not to notice the generational gap between you and your sisters. What challenges or opportunities does that present? Yeah, I live with two sisters who are 79 and 80. I have lived with there's a middle generation that's probably around 55, 60 and fewer in number. There's not a lot my age in our particular order, and really in many of the orders. And I think that's for a lot of different reasons, but let me do say that there was a huge boom of entry. So what we're seeing now, and so many people see as a, a sad thing, that there aren't a whole bunch of sisters everywhere and everything. It's more that if you look over time, there were these, in the number of people in religious life, there were ebbs and flows, and the 70s, 50s to 70s, it was up here. So we're kind of coming down now. I think because I'm an engineer, I already do things differently. I already think differently. I'm very used to being different. And so it's just one of the many differences. There are struggles. We have a younger sisters call Zoom that I'm on, and it's ages like 70 and down or something, which to me, I'm like, what? That I'm not sure that the point of this to help each other relate is helping me necessarily in that way, but it's a big topic in religious life, right? So one of the things that we do is we have a lot of meetings about this, and we've moved from being CND sisters, and this is how we study about religion, about our formation, to much more inter-congregational. So my formation in the novitiate was with people from many different congregations, women, men. One's planning to go study to be priests, one's planning to stay as brothers, from all kinds of different orders. Some wore habits, some didn't. And so what we found is that there's a really, really great network there. And because of social media and the technology, we can connect in a different way. So there's this one Facebook group that is younger sisters in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And it's fantastic. It's lifeblood to be able to connect and relate. But I have to say, there's so many beautiful things about living with people who are not my age. You know, the generational sharing about our experiences, and for me as a young sister trying to find my way, they have so much advice and wisdom for me that is really, really helpful. So yeah, there are challenges, but I think there are so many great things too. So many women that I get to know that just have so much to teach me. There's one woman who recently passed, one sister. She was one of the first to help bring computers into the schools in PEI. Like, she pushed to have a computer in the school. I can't even fathom that. I had one of the early computers in my bedroom in 5th grade because it was my dad's cast off, or 3rd grade or something. So I am a true millennial in that it's hard to imagine pre-computer era. And so we joke and we laugh about the many things that we're like, wait, what does that mean to you? And I do want to say, the thing about the CNDs that I've found is that, and I think religious life in general, is that you are all there on the same path, seeking goodness and seeking to share that goodness and to share that love. So I think that's really important, that when we're all united and realize that we're on a similar trajectory of trying to share goodness in the world, it's hard to be mad because, you know, there's like an ounce of milk left in the container because, you know, it wasn't meant with malice, you know? So anyway, so I think that was the last question. So thank you very much for having me, Lydia. And you can find me through UPEI or contact me. I'd be happy to email with anyone.
Yes, and just so everyone knows, we did record this and we will be sharing it online as well. Sister Libby has given us that permission. And again, thank you. That was so wonderful. When you said, "Are you guys tired this morning?" I'm like, "I am." And then you justified it. So maybe every day when I go to work now, I'll be like, "Father Jim, you know how far I traveled last night? Plus I walked to work today." Again, thank you so much. And thank you to the CND sisters who shared the poster online, and some of them joined with us today. We have one webinar left this afternoon with Dr. Dave Sinnis. Full disclosure, he's my husband, and he will be doing spiritual styles. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and thank you so much, Sister Libby. Have a great day, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you this afternoon.